To me, it seems like the best way of dealing with the problem is to have another referendum with appropriate ground rules for the referendum and to have an honest discussion before the referendum. It would be perfectly acceptable, it seems to me, for there to be a Brexit vote, provided that the British people were broadly in agreement that your identity as something separate from Europe is so important that you're willing to accept the economic costs and the other costs. That would be an honest outcome.
The ayes to the right, 258. The noes to the left, 303.
I suppose it's fascinating to talk to you at this time where Parliament doesn't seem to be able to come to a decision. We are also looking for a new Prime Minister right now. There's a lot of soul searching going on about how to get out of this current crisis. So I take your point about if there were another referendum, but what do you think is important for the new Prime Minister of this country to do?
There are things that all British people hold in common. You're in the land of Shakespeare, you're in the land of Tennyson, you're in the land of Magna Carta. Britain has had a great history. It's a history that unifies Britain. And so what I would hope for a Prime Minister would be stressing the things of which Britain is justifiably proud and that bring together all British, whether they're recent immigrants from Eastern Europe.
But what you're describing there sounds like great leadership. And actually, much of the commentary about leaders in this country, or would-be leaders in this country, is that we're lacking leadership. How much do you think it is about the individual at times of crises who are in office, or the office itself?
I would say that leaders make a difference on the average under some circumstances, more in an autocracy than in a democracy, because they got more power. Leaders make more difference in wartime when they have more power, even in a democracy, but also leaders make more difference in a country where there are two hotly contested alternatives. For example, Britain in May 1940, the face-off between Lord Halifax and Winston Churchill. The debate was whether Britain should seek accommodation with Hitler. Today, there is a big role for leadership in the UK because there are fiercely contested points of view, the Brexit and the non-Brexit point of view. So I would say this is an occasion in British history, just as May 1940, where a leader made a difference, can make a difference.
We've just had protests here, which have been hugely participated in, the Extinction Rebellion group. But do you think, particularly with climate change, that it is effectively the sort of modern day civil rights movement almost now, in the sense of, are we finally starting to take it seriously?
It's one of the modern day civil rights movements. People often ask me, Jared, what's the most important problem for the world? Is it climate change? And my flip response is, the most important problem for the world is trying to look for the one most important problem for the world, because there's climate change, but there's also unsustainable resource use, and there's inequality around the world, and there's the nuclear threat, the risk of the use of nuclear weapons. So climate change is one of the major problems. I would not say it's the most important one, because if we solve climate change, and if we don't solve inequality and unsustainable resource use, we're finished.
Is there a moment then at the end of a national crisis where you realise, like you would in your personal life, I'm through that?
Yes. For example, let's take Britain. I lived in Britain 58 to 62, when Britain was shedding the memories and the realities of presiding over the greatest empire that the world had ever known. When I was living in Britain, Britain had its first race riots, that was 1958. Britain scrapped its last battleships, that was 58 to 62. Britain had Suez make clear that Britain could no longer impose its will on the world, but Britain reached, I would say, a quasi-equilibrium in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Decided that it was part of Europe and should apply to join the European Union. So I would say that Britain resolved in a way its crisis. But this also makes clear that in another sense, crises never get resolved. A couple that has had marital problems and they decide to stay together, that doesn't mean that they're guaranteed to be happy for the rest of their lives. They may have another round of marital problems. And similarly in the case of Britain, now some of those same issues are coming up again. You may settle them, or you may settle them the same way or a different way, but these issues of geography guarantees that these issues will come up in the future, because Britain will always be an island and will always be close to Europe. So you will always be struggling with this question.
And on that happy note, thank you very much for talking to us.
You are welcome.